In just 24 hours, the burning hatred in the San Francisco courtroom transformed an arrogant lawyer into a man begging for forgiveness. What secret drove him to kneel before the woman he once scorned? San Francisco stretched out beneath the fading light of a late winter afternoon. The sky was painted in shades of gray-blue tinged with orange-red as the sun dipped behind the towering skyscrapers. The streets were crowded, cars speeding by in a rush, pedestrians bundled up in thick coats, and the cold wind snaked through every corner, carrying with it the scent of coffee from the small cafes along the road. In this bustling financial district, amidst the gleaming glass towers, sat the prestigious law office of Ethan Brooks, one of the city's most expensive and powerful attorneys. Inside the spacious office, the soft golden glow from the crystal chandelier bathed the polished walnut desk. Everything in the room exuded sophistication, power, and luxury, from the shelves packed with leather-bound law books to the expensive artwork adorning the walls. Behind the desk, a large window opened to a view of the city at dusk, where buildings stood closely together, their lights shimmering. It was a luxurious yet cold space, much like its owner. Ethan Brooks sat in his black leather chair, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand, the other flipping through case files. His cold eyes scanned each line with indifference. A knock echoed through the room. A moment passed, then a woman's voice called from outside. It was clear and professional, yet held a touch of softness. "Mr. Brooks, Lena Carter is here." Ethan didn't look up, letting out a short breath before setting his coffee down and adjusting his cufflinks. He gestured lazily. "Send her in." The door opened, and Lena Carter stepped inside, her presence commanding, confident, yet undeniably proud. She wore a dark blue suit that clung to her tall frame, each step radiating the air of someone accustomed to leadership and making decisions. But from the moment she entered the room, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The change was almost imperceptible, yet it was nonetheless clear. Ethan's gaze flicked over her, momentarily pausing before quickly turning apathetic. If this had been another client, perhaps a male CEO from a prestigious corporation, he might have stood, offered a hand with formality. But not this time. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his cold eyes appraising her. When Lena extended her hand, only then did he reluctantly stand, offering a slow handshake. His grip was cold, detached, not warm, not respectful. It was merely a formal gesture, the bare minimum of courtesy. Lena felt the chill in his touch, but kept her expression neutral. She had encountered many like Ethan Brooks in her career, powerful men who believed the business world was their exclusive playground. She knew when she was being underestimated, and right now, Ethan Brooks was underestimating her. He smiled, a strained, insincere smile, as though he had already decided the outcome of their meeting the moment Lena entered the room. "Please sit down, Miss Carter." His voice was low and cold, without a hint of kindness. Lena took a seat, briefly scanning the room before locking eyes with him. "I'm sure you've heard about the lawsuit," she began, her tone calm but clear. "I want you to represent Carter Technologies." Ethan folded his arms, tilting his head slightly as if considering, but his gaze betrayed his boredom. He picked up a file from the desk, flipping through it absent-mindedly before setting it down and leaning back in his chair, a faint, dismissive smile curling on his lips. "It's a big case, quite complicated," his voice stretched out, as if searching for an excuse to refuse without saying it outright. But Lena didn't give him the chance to deflect. "And I need the best to win," she said, her eyes never leaving his. Ethan paused for a moment, then exhaled slowly. Finally, he placed his hands on the desk and looked directly at Lena. And then he spoke the words Lena had almost expected. The atmosphere in the office grew colder the moment Ethan Brooks opened the case file for Carter Technologies. He reclined in his chair, his eyes skimming over the pages with clear indifference, as if this were nothing more than a worthless contract. Every gesture of his, from the slight furrow of his brow to the way he flipped through the papers with his fingertips in a bored manner, exuded undisguised contempt. As Lena waited for his response, her gaze remained calm but sharp, betraying no hint of hesitation. But inside, she could feel the tension rising, second by second. After a long pause, Ethan chuckled dismissively, folded the file, and pushed it aside as if it no longer mattered to him. Carter Technologies. He repeated the name of her company slowly, emphasizing each syllable as though hearing it for the first time. Then his deep, cold voice emerged, utterly devoid of any goodwill. I don't take on messes like this. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Lena felt the blood in her veins boil, but she held her emotions in check, not letting her anger show on her face. She took a deep breath, looked directly at Ethan, trying to find any semblance of logic in his words. But there was no reasonable explanation. Nothing in the case file was chaotic enough to be called a mess. It was a major, serious lawsuit. The only issue here was not the case itself, but the person behind it. Lena understood. Ethan wasn't rejecting the case because of its nature. He was rejecting it because of her. A wave of disgust rose within her, but the audience could see how she suppressed it. She didn't let herself show anger, but her fingers subtly tightened around the edge of the desk. The insult was right there in his tone, in the way he didn't even bother to hide the bias in his gaze. It seems Mr. Brooks hasn't actually read the case thoroughly, Lena said, her voice steady but with a hidden sharpness. We're not just some small company trying to grab a little market share. This is a huge lawsuit, millions of dollars at stake, and I need a lawyer good enough to handle it. Ethan smirked as though Lena had said something foolish. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a sneer passing over his lips. Miss Carter, he said, stretching the words out in mockery. You don't need to try and convince me. I've already made my decision. And then he stood up, a rude, dismissive gesture with no respect whatsoever. Ethan didn't even glance at Lena again. No apology, no remorse, just absolute indifference. He reached for his coat hanging on the chair as though the conversation had ended, as if she were just another faceless client not worth his time. Lena stayed seated, feeling a humiliation unlike any she had ever known rising in her chest. She had encountered many men like Ethan Brooks in her career, those who trusted in their privileges, believing they had the right to decide who was worthy and who was not. But she had never felt such blatant disregard before. Yet, she didn't let a single ounce of weakness show. She would never allow that. She stood up slowly, with complete control, her cold gaze following Ethan's retreating figure as he moved toward the door, as though he had just ended an insignificant meeting. Thank you for your time, Mr. Brooks, she said, her voice calm. But there was an invisible knife in each word. Ethan didn't bother to turn around. He just raised his hand in a lazy gesture of farewell, a contempt so palpable it was almost laughable. The door closed, and in that moment, Lena knew she would never forget this moment. But there was one thing Ethan Brooks didn't know. In just 24 hours, his fate would change forever. The largest courthouse in San Francisco buzzed with the activity of an important morning. The steps leading into the building were crowded with people, lawyers, journalists, clients, and those eager to witness the trial that was drawing attention from both the media and the business world. Outside, a group of reporters stood waiting, cameras ready, flashes of light constantly flickering as key figures appeared. Amid this tense scene, Ethan Brooks emerged, walking without haste, his demeanor calm, yet filled with arrogance, as if the entire world revolved around him. He stepped out of a luxury car, casually adjusting his shirt cuffs, then strode up the large steps leading into the courthouse. To him, this was just another ordinary day in his illustrious career. A major lawsuit, perhaps, but it was also just another victory waiting to be added to his long list of accomplishments. Ethan didn't look around, didn't pay attention to the curious gazes or the questions reporters were trying to throw at him. He didn't need to care. Victory was a given. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with tension as all parties prepared for the high-stakes trial. But Ethan remained completely at ease, even disgustingly comfortable. He entered the lawyer area, offered a half-smile to a few colleagues waiting. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said, his voice dripping with confidence. One of the younger attorneys, just starting out, responded with admiration. "I hear this case is pretty tough, but I guess for you, there's nothing to worry about, right?" Ethan chuckled softly, giving the young colleague a light pat on the shoulder, as if to say he was all too familiar with battles like this. "To be fair, it's just another step on my path," he said, his tone full of self-satisfaction. "Everything is predictable. Just know how to play your cards." He didn't care about the seriousness of the case. To Ethan, this was just a game, Another match he'd easily win, just as he had done hundreds of times before. The absolute confidence, the contempt for his opponents, and the nature of seeing everything as a trophy were all too clear to anyone watching him. For Ethan, there was nothing in that courtroom that could worry him. But then, as the door to the courtroom opened, a familiar figure appeared in the judge's seat, and in that moment, Ethan Brooks's smile vanished. Ethan Brooks stepped into the courtroom with a casual air, his leather briefcase in hand, his confident stride cutting through the sea of eager onlookers and media personnel. The entire room buzzed with anticipation, but to him, this was just another day, another win that would be added to his growing list of triumphs. He flashed a brief, self-assured smile at a few of his colleagues, the ones who had always admired him from afar, those who whispered his name in awe every time his name appeared on a high-profile case. As he made his way toward the lawyer's section, he glanced at the empty seat where Lena Carter had yet to arrive. No one was a match for him. But then, just as he took the final step toward his seat, he looked up, and in that instant, the world seemed to stop. There, seated in the judge's chair, clad in the dark robe of authority, was Lena Carter. Time froze. Every sound in the room seemed to dissolve. The hum of whispers, the shuffling of papers, the rustle of clothing all faded into a deafening silence. Ethan felt the weight of her gaze piercing through him, leaving a cold, suffocating sensation crawling up his spine. His heart skipped a beat, his breath catching in his chest. He knew exactly who she was, and yet, seeing her there, in the seat of power, made him feel something he hadn't experienced in years: fear. The woman who had once been beneath him, in his office, in his world, now towered over him. Lena Carter, the woman he had dismissed so easily just a day ago, the woman he had believed to be beneath his notice, now here she was, sitting with the complete, unwavering authority that only someone truly in control could exude. Gone was the uncertainty he had seen in her before. Gone was the woman who had looked up to him, unsure of herself. In her place was someone unshakable, someone who commanded respect with a single glance. Ethan stood there, his feet seemingly glued to the cold stone floor of the courtroom. His mind raced, but his body refused to move. He felt trapped, exposed, something he hadn't felt in years. The briefcase in his hand tightened, the leather creaking under his grip, but it was as if the world had swallowed his ability to speak. Lena's eyes remained locked on him, unblinking, and in them, there was no sign of anger, no trace of the contempt he expected. Instead, there was a calm, calculated power, like a predator sizing up its prey. She didn't speak, not yet. She didn't need to. Her mere presence had already crushed his composure, and, with it, every ounce of his confidence. In that moment, Ethan Brooks, the once untouchable lawyer, felt small. His usual swagger, the arrogance that defined him, seemed utterly insignificant in her gaze. The air was thick with tension. Ethan's mind fought to process the scene in front of him. The courtroom seemed to shrink around him. The reporters, the onlookers, the other lawyers, all of them faded into the background. It was just Lena and him, her gaze cutting through him like a blade, reminding him that he was no longer in control. And then the gavel fell. The sharp, commanding sound of wood against wood echoed through the room, breaking the silence with a power that seemed to shake the very walls. Lena's voice, calm and commanding, filled the space, breaking through the thick air that had enveloped Ethan. "Mr. Brooks, are you ready?" Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything she had become. In those few words, Ethan heard all the authority, the certainty that Lena now held. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. She wasn't asking him if he was ready. She was telling him that she was in charge, that this was her domain. The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence hanging heavily. Ethan opened his mouth, but for the first time in a long time, no words came. His throat felt dry, his mind scrambled. His usual quick wit, his ability to talk circles around anyone, had completely abandoned him. He tried again, but his voice faltered. Lena's eyes never wavered, never left him for a second. There was no mercy in them, no sympathy, only the absolute calmness of someone who knew they held all the cards. In that moment, Ethan realized something he had never fully understood before. He was the one in the spotlight now. He was the one being judged. For the first time in his life, Ethan Brooks was the one being overpowered. And it wasn't by the law or by some courtroom tactic. It was by Lena Carter, a woman he had once dismissed as inconsequential, a woman he had believed he could crush without thought. Now, standing in front of him, she was everything he feared, a force of nature, unshakable, unstoppable. As he stood there, the weight of the situation pressing down on him, a sudden realization dawned. This wasn't just about the case. This was about him. The arrogance, the sense of superiority he had carried for so long had led him here, to this moment where he was no longer the one in control. And as Lena's gaze held him there, steady and unyielding, Ethan knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan Brooks tightened his grip on the leather strap of his briefcase, forcing himself to maintain an air of calm. But his entire body felt rigid, as if frozen in place. His entire life, he had been accustomed to being the one in control, the one calling the shots. But now, for the first time in his career, he was the one standing under the authority of someone else. And worse still, that someone was Lena Carter. A quiet wave of disgust rose within him, not because he regretted what he had said or done the day before, but because he hated the feeling of being placed in a position of weakness. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room fixed on him, waiting for his next move. Some of them might not know about his past with Lena, but a few of his colleagues had certainly recognized the bitter irony of the situation. In a fleeting moment, he cursed himself for not having done his homework before stepping into this case. How could he not have known that Lena Carter was the presiding judge? It was a fatal mistake, a mistake he had never made before. But Ethan couldn't let anyone see the panic bubbling up inside him. He swallowed hard, clenching his jaw to hold back any signs of tension. His hand trembled slightly before he quickly shoved it into his pants pocket. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to speak, his voice unfamiliar to him, lacking the usual arrogance he was known for. "Of course, Your Honor." His words echoed through the vast courtroom, but Ethan could sense a difference. His tone no longer held the absolute confidence that usually accompanied his every word. It was calm yet empty, as though he was trying to convince himself more than answering Lena. She still stared at him, not raising an eyebrow, not smiling, simply observing as if she had anticipated everything running through his mind in that very moment. No one in the room noticed the underlying storm churning inside Ethan Brooks, but the audience could feel it clearly. This was no longer the invincible lawyer they had once known. This was a man realizing for the first time in his life that he had made an irreversible mistake. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier as the trial officially moved into the debate phase. Ethan Brooks, after the initial shock of facing Lena, quickly regained his composure. He took a deep breath, slipping back into his professional facade, a shield he had worn countless times to protect himself from pressure, especially in moments like this. His mind raced, but his body betrayed none of it. His hand tightened around his leather briefcase as he adjusted his jacket and cleared his throat, quickly composing himself. Lena Carter sat silently in her seat, watching, her eyes unblinking as if daring him to slip. But Ethan wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. He had been in far worse situations and always emerged victorious. "Your Honor." Ethan's voice rang out, rich with confidence, every word rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "We stand here today in the face of a lawsuit filled with accusations that are completely unfounded, based entirely on assumptions with no real evidence to support them." His words were calculated, cutting through the tense silence. Carter Technologies has every right to make claims, but in the realm of law, accusations are nothing more than words unless they are backed by clear, irrefutable proof. And in this case, there is none. Ethan paused, looking over the jury, his gaze sweeping across them in an attempt to win their trust. His tone shifted, the smoothness and confidence never faltering. "What we're dealing with here is nothing more than a baseless smear campaign, a deliberate effort to malign the good name of my client's corporation." He paused again, as if letting the weight of his words sink in, and then turned his attention to the judge, but not without a brief, deliberate glance at Lena. The courtroom was entirely focused on him now, and in this moment, Ethan was the master of the space. Every eye was on him. He controlled the narrative, and he wasn't about to let it slip. "We are not here to participate in games of emotional manipulation," Ethan continued, his voice steady, precise, cutting through the tension that threatened to overwhelm the room. We are here to examine the facts. And the fact is, he trailed off for just a moment, savoring the drama of the moment. The facts are that Carter Technologies has failed to provide any substantial evidence that my client has engaged in any form of wrongdoing. His words flowed effortlessly, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times before. As Ethan spoke, the members of Carter Technologies' team clenched their fists tightly, some of them visibly struggling to contain their anger. They knew what he was doing, knew he was trying to twist the facts to fit his narrative. They knew that the company he was defending had stolen ideas from Carter Technologies, and here he was, spinning the story as if it were some trivial misunderstanding. Ethan's eyes remained ice-cold, showing no signs of doubt, no trace of remorse. He spoke as though he were presenting an airtight case, every sentence crafted to solidify his position and sway the jury to his side. There wasn't a flicker of hesitation in his demeanor, no sign that he was lying through his teeth, no glimpse of the internal conflict that should have been gnawing at him. Just the same smooth-talking lawyer, a man who had spent years perfecting the art of persuasion, doing what he did best. Lena Carter, sitting at the judge's bench, observed the entire scene with absolute cold precision. She saw through Ethan's smooth talk, the way he carefully chose each word to direct the jury's attention away from the reality of the situation. She could hear the lies hidden beneath his well-crafted rhetoric, could feel the manipulation behind his words. But she didn't interrupt. She didn't break her composure. She simply listened, taking in every word, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say anything yet. She knew Ethan too well to be fooled. She was waiting for the right moment, waiting for him to slip up, to show a crack in his armor. Ethan finished his first argument with a deliberate emphasis, as if he was sealing his point. In any case like this, careful and meticulous consideration is key, he said, his voice lowering just slightly, adding gravity to his words. And when this case is examined fairly, without the noise of baseless accusations, I am confident the court will see exactly what I see. These claims have no real basis. The courtroom fell into a brief but intense silence. Ethan stood there, allowing the weight of his words to linger in the air. But this silence wasn't the calm before a storm. It was the calm before the truth broke through the facade. The room, filled with eager anticipation, could feel the tension crackling, the unspoken disgust simmering beneath the surface. Everyone in the room, from the jury to the audience, could sense that Ethan Brooks wasn't speaking for justice. He was speaking for victory, for the thrill of winning at any cost. Ethan's heart might have been pounding, his mind racing behind the cold mask of confidence. But to everyone else, it looked like he was in complete control. It was clear to those who knew what to look for. He wasn't fighting for the truth, but for his own success. And for the first time in his life, that truth was starting to unravel, layer by layer. Lena Carter listened intently to every word of Ethan Brooks's defense, her gaze as sharp and cold as a blade, waiting for the right moment to strike. As Ethan finished his argument, a brief silence enveloped the courtroom. Lena did not rush to respond. She allowed the silence to stretch just long enough for the audience to feel the blatant falseness in Ethan's defense. Then she slowly leaned forward, her eyes locking onto him, piercing through the layers of false confidence he had carefully crafted. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice calm but chilling, each word deliberately honed to cut through his smooth rhetoric. "According to your argument, Carter Technologies is simply making baseless allegations. Let me ask you then, can your client explain why a product almost identical to theirs appeared just months after Carter Technologies released its internal research findings?" The courtroom fell dead silent. A few members of the jury exchanged glances, as if they too had just recognized the inconsistency Lena had pointed out. Ethan swallowed hard, but his composure remained intact, for now. "Your Honor, coincidences in the tech industry are not uncommon," he began. But before he could finish, Lena immediately cut him off, not giving him the chance to deflect. "So, I suppose the internal emails between your client's executives, clearly referring to Carter Technologies' research documents, must also be another coincidence." A cold draft seemed to sweep across the courtroom. Ethan began to falter, his earlier confidence shaking visibly as he realized Lena had something he hadn't anticipated: solid evidence. He licked his lips, trying to find words to counter her. But his thought process was abruptly interrupted. Lena's unwavering gaze remained fixed on him, and she could almost feel the tension in Ethan's temple, the thin bead of sweat slowly tracing its way down his forehead. The audience could see not just Lena's sharp rebuttal, but also feel the disgust she harbored, not only for Ethan, but for the system that had allowed men like him to thrive, men who could manipulate justice with nothing but flowery words masking the truth. But this time, he would not escape it so easily. The room felt charged, the weight of Lena's words sinking in like a stone. And as Ethan stood there, the arrogance that had once defined him was being chipped away, piece by piece, revealing the man behind the facade. His earlier composure, his smooth legal arguments, now seemed like nothing more than a thin veil hiding the truth he could no longer outrun. Lena had brought the truth to the surface with surgical precision. Ethan Brooks, once the embodiment of legal prowess, was now trapped, exposed, and there was no way out. Lena watched, unblinking, as the realization settled over him. This was the moment he had underestimated. This wasn't just about the case. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about exposing the lies, and Lena Carter had just laid the trap he had foolishly walked right into. The courtroom fell silent as the recess was announced, but the air was thick with tension that seemed to cling to every corner of the room. The intense intellectual duel between Lena Carter and Ethan Brooks had left an indelible mark on everyone present. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, many still whispered, their eyes lingering on the powerful exchange that had just unfolded. But through it all, Lena remained seated in her chair, her posture unwavering, her eyes locked on Ethan, who was now gathering his papers, trying to maintain an air of nonchalance. He moved quickly, his hands shaking slightly as they shuffled through the files, but his face remained carefully composed, the mask of a confident lawyer never wavering. But Lena saw through him. She could tell by the way his shoulders were stiffer than usual, by the slight catch in his breath, that he was rattled. Ethan Brooks, for the first time in what was likely many years, felt the sharp sting of uncertainty. He knew he was in deep, that the polished words he'd spoken in court couldn't conceal the gaping holes in his argument. He was exposed, and for the first time, he wasn't sure how to wriggle free from the trap that Lena had set with such precision. The real thing that disgusted Lena, though, wasn't his arrogance or his practiced demeanor. It wasn't his ability to speak so fluently despite the lies he'd been feeding to the jury. What truly repulsed her was his cowardice. Ethan Brooks wasn't a man driven by a sense of justice, by the right to protect what was moral or fair. No, Ethan was driven by self-interest and a thirst for power. He would do whatever it took to secure his victory, and if that meant trampling over justice, over truth, over the lives of those caught in the crossfire, so be it. Lena watched him closely, her eyes narrowed, sharp as a blade. She could see it in his eyes. No remorse, no shame, not even a flicker of conscience. Only the cold, calculating gaze of a man who would stop at nothing to maintain his perfect record. The truth was irrelevant to him. All that mattered was winning. As Ethan turned to leave, Lena's gaze followed him, unwavering and unyielding. She didn't try to hide the contempt in her eyes, nor did she care who saw it. He deserved every ounce of it. In her career, she had encountered many men like him, men who wore their arrogance like a shield, believing they were untouchable, that they could buy and manipulate their way out of any situation. Men who thought they could play with justice, bending it to their will without consequence. For a brief moment, as Ethan took a step toward the door, he must have felt the weight of her gaze. He faltered just slightly, a brief hesitation in his stride. But then, as quickly as it came, the moment passed, and he resumed walking as if nothing had happened. He might have felt her watching him, but he wasn't willing to acknowledge it. He wasn't willing to admit that, for the first time in his life, someone had seen through him, had seen him for the fraud that he was. Lena, however, wasn't fooled. Her lips curled into a faint, bitter smile, but it wasn't one of satisfaction. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of cold recognition. She knew what he was, and she knew what was to come. As Ethan walked away, the crowd in the courtroom gradually grew quieter, but Lena's thoughts were still sharp, focused on the man retreating from the room. She had seen him for what he truly was, a man willing to do anything to win, to crush anyone who stood in his way. And he would pay for it. He might have deceived many, He might have fooled himself into thinking he was untouchable, but he would never deceive her. And this time, he would not escape. The game was far from over. Ethan Brooks had made his move, but now it was Lena's turn. And when she played her hand, it would be a move that he would never see coming. For he would not win this time. Not this time. Late into the night, Ethan Brooks's office was dimly lit by the weak glow of the desk lamp in the corner. Outside, the city of San Francisco hummed with the bustle of traffic, but within this space, the air was thick with an invisible tension. Ethan sat behind his desk, loosening his tie, his shirt slightly wrinkled after a long day of litigation. He reached for his whiskey glass, swirling it lightly in his hand, when the door to his office suddenly swung open. His assistant stepped in, holding a thick stack of documents, his face tense as if he were carrying a deadly secret. "Mr. Brooks, we have a problem." The assistant's voice was low, almost a whisper. Ethan furrowed his brow, setting the glass down with a deliberate slowness. His eyes flashed impatience as the thick file was placed in front of him. The pages felt heavy, as if they contained a truth that was impossible to deny. He opened the file, his eyes quickly scanning the first few lines. Then, within moments, his face darkened. One of his employees, the very person handling the representation of the client in this lawsuit, had been involved in the theft of data from Carter Technologies. Emails exchanged, internal documents leaked, even confidential meeting notes. Everything pointed to one undeniable fact. His client was indeed guilty. Ethan clenched the paper in his hand, a slow burn of anger rising, but not because he was repulsed by their actions, but because this could force him into a corner. He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, then slowly folded the file back up. No one but him could know this. Destroy the documents? No, that would be too risky. But hiding them, covering them up, finding a way to twist the case before Lena Carter could get wind of it, that was what he had to do. Ethan reached for his whiskey glass and drank it in one gulp, his gaze darkening with cold resolve. He didn't care about justice. He didn't care about the truth. All he cared about was winning. The thoughts settled in his mind with icy clarity, and a new sense of determination took hold. This was his game now, and no matter the cost, he was going to play it to the end. Lena Carter was a formidable adversary, but even she wouldn't be able to uncover the truth before it was too late. Ethan knew this, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of what he was willing to do to secure his victory. Ethan sat motionless in front of the file, his eyes glued to the undeniable evidence spread before him. Yet, in his mind, thoughts swirled like a violent storm. He could do the right thing right now. He could walk into court tomorrow, lay everything on the table, and let justice decide. But then the image of himself, his polished exterior, his illustrious reputation, the adoring crowd of admirers around him, flashed in his mind, choking out any remaining sense of guilt. His hand tightened around the edge of the file, his knuckles turning white from the force. Justice doesn't bring victory. Justice doesn't help him maintain his place among the elite lawyers. Justice doesn't grant him power, but victory does. His chest rose and fell heavily. 1 second, then 2, and then, with a decisive motion, he tore the file apart. Each page ripped under his hands, fragments of evidence falling like confetti onto the desk, as if his sins were being ruthlessly buried. Without hesitation, Ethan flung everything into the trash, his eyes cold as though the things he had just destroyed held no value. The sound of crumpling paper echoed sharply in the quiet room. But within Ethan, a strange feeling stirred, a sense of disgust, not directed at anyone else, but at himself. He quickly pushed it away. He told himself there was no other choice. This was the only way to protect his reputation, to maintain his position. He had chosen the side of the strong, and in this world, the truth didn't matter as much as the one who controlled it. Ethan stood up and walked toward the door, leaving behind the trash can full of torn, shredded pages, the final remnants of a man who perhaps once knew right from wrong. The final trial had arrived, and the courtroom was packed, every inch of space filled with eager spectators. The air was thick with a tension so heavy that it felt as though the very walls were about to crack. Ethan Brooks sat at the defense table, his usual cold, professional demeanor firmly in place. But inside, something was different. A gnawing sense of unease was beginning to creep up on him, a feeling that hadn't been there before. This was supposed to be his moment, his final chance to close the case, present his arguments, and walk away victorious. Yet Lena Carter, with her unnerving calm and icy composure, had kept him on edge throughout the entire trial. She had become an unpredictable force, and that made him feel vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt in years. As the proceedings began, Ethan tried to shake off the unsettling feeling. He glanced around at the familiar faces in the courtroom, his colleagues, his supporters, all watching him, waiting for him to seal the deal. This was his arena, and he was used to dominating it. But something about the way Lena sat there, serene and unshaken in her position of power, made him feel as though he were the one being scrutinized, the one being judged. She had a way of looking at him that made him question every move he was about to make. Then the moment came. Lena, as calm as ever, leaned forward and placed a thick file on the judge's desk. Her eyes flicked over to Ethan, and for a split second, their gazes locked, cold, calculating, and sharp. A chill ran down Ethan's spine as she spoke, her voice unwavering and deliberate, slicing through the room with the precision of a scalpel. "I would like to present additional evidence," she said, her tone firm and commanding. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, and his stomach tightened. What was this? He had burned everything. There was nothing left that could jeopardize his position. He had eliminated all traces, all the evidence that could point to his client's guilt. But as Lena opened the file, his mind raced. How could this be happening? The moment she began flipping through the pages, Ethan's body went rigid, a sense of dread settling deep in his chest. His eyes widened, disbelief flooding him as the very documents he had destroyed the night before, the emails, the internal communications, the confidential meeting notes appeared in front of him, unscathed and fully intact. Each page, each word on those pages, felt like a hammer striking him in the chest, crushing his carefully constructed world. He had thought he was the one in control. He had thought he could erase the truth. But here it was, staring him in the face, undeniable and irrefutable. The courtroom was silent, but it wasn't the quiet he had expected. It was the silence of a world unraveled. The gasps from the audience, the stunned murmurs from the jury, all pierced the stillness like daggers. Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He was rooted to the spot, unable to look away from Lena, whose gaze now felt like a vice tightening with every passing second. Lena did not flinch, did not show a hint of triumph or satisfaction. She simply watched him, waiting for him to realize the weight of his actions. She had always been more than just a formidable opponent. She had become a mirror, reflecting back everything he had tried to bury. Then came the fatal blow. Carter Technologies backed up the data before it was deleted, Lena declared, her voice cold, methodical. Each word struck Ethan like a physical blow, punctuating the death of his defense. And this is irrefutable evidence of intellectual property theft. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face, his thoughts scattered, his mind unable to process the impossibility of what was happening. He had lost everything he had worked for. Everything he had sacrificed to maintain his reputation was unraveling in front of his eyes. The facade he had so carefully constructed, his confidence, his arrogance, his unshakable belief in his control was falling apart. His breath came in short, ragged bursts. The world around him seemed to spin, his own voice silenced by the realization that he had been outplayed, outmaneuvered. He thought he had controlled the game, but Lena had always known how to expose him for what he was. A man willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of victory, even if it meant betraying every principle he had once claimed to stand for. The sound of paper flipping echoed in the room, but to Ethan, it was as if it were the final toll of a bell signaling his defeat. The irrefutable evidence had been laid bare, and there was no escape. No amount of charm, no legal maneuvering, no lies would save him now. Lena had won, and in that moment, Ethan Brooks knew that not only had he lost the case, but he had lost the very thing that had made him who he was, the power to control the truth. The truth had come for him, and this time, there was no way out. Ethan Brooks sat frozen in his chair, his eyes glued to the file in front of him as if it were a death sentence hanging over him. He tried to speak, tried to find a counterargument, but nothing came out. His throat felt dry, and beads of sweat began to form on his forehead despite the courtroom's comfortable temperature. He could feel every gaze in the room on him, no longer filled with respect or admiration, but with contempt. Lena Carter remained unmoved in her seat, her gaze unflinching, but deep within, those watching could feel the utter disgust she reserved for the man before her. The jury murmured amongst themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Those who had once admired Ethan now saw a coward exposed in the blinding light of justice. He had entered this room with the air of an invincible man, but now he was nothing but a trembling shadow in the face of undeniable truth. Ethan swallowed hard, his hand instinctively gripping the edge of the wooden table, but there was nothing left to hold on to. He stammered, his voice thick with desperation. But just as he was about to continue, a mocking laugh rang out from the audience. A wave of humiliation filled the room. This was the very moment he had been running from, the moment he lost everything. A lawyer once lauded and perched at the peak of power, now stripped down to his core. Not a legal genius, not an invincible man, but just a liar, a man deserving of scorn. His mind spun, trying to make sense of the impossible turn of events. He had controlled the narrative, twisted the facts, buried the truth beneath layers of lies and deceit. But now it was all unraveling, piece by piece, as the weight of his own actions bore down on him. The room around him felt suffocating, the walls closing in with every passing second. The audience, once captivated by his eloquence and charm, now saw him for what he truly was, a man who had played the system for his own gain, only to be caught in his own web of deception. Lena's voice cut through the heavy silence, cold and unyielding, as she addressed the court. But Ethan couldn't focus on her words anymore. All he could hear was the laughter, the mockery, the sound of his empire crumbling. This was the cost of his ambition, the price for his disregard for truth, for justice. He had fought tooth and nail to reach the top, only to find that the very thing he had sought to conquer had now defeated him. And there was no escape. The murmurs in the courtroom gradually subsided as Lena Carter gripped the wooden gavel in her hand, her eyes never leaving Ethan Brooks. The man who had once been arrogant, cold, and full of power was now reduced to a pathetic, defeated figure with nowhere left to run. He lowered his head, his eyes hollow, his shoulders slumped as if every ounce of strength, every shred of pride he had once carried, had vanished in an instant. Gone were the sharp arguments. Gone was the smooth, confident voice. All that remained was an unbearable silence, thick with humiliation. Lena slowly turned her gaze to the jury, then toward the plaintiff's side. Carter Technologies had won, but none of them showed joy, no smiles or smug satisfaction. They didn't need to celebrate, for justice had already spoken for itself. She took a deep breath and brought the gavel down with a sharp strike. The court declares Carter Technologies the winner. Her voice rang out, unwavering, devoid of any unnecessary emotion. This was not a victory to be celebrated, but a lesson to be etched into the fabric of justice. Lena glanced at Ethan one final time. Her gaze held no hatred, no satisfaction, only a chilling disgust. Not because he had lost, but because he had chosen to lose himself, willing to abandon his morals to preserve his hollow reputation. She had once believed Ethan Brooks to be a powerful man, but now she realized he had never been strong. He was merely a coward dressed in the guise of power, and now that facade had completely crumbled. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, and in that moment, Ethan Brooks had not only lost the case, he had lost himself. The night was late, but the light in Lena Carter's office remained on. She sat behind her desk, her eyes tired, yet still holding the sharpness of steel. The trial was over, but its echoes lingered in her mind like an unhealed wound. When the knock came at the door, Lena didn't need to guess who stood outside. She slowly lifted her head as the door opened and Ethan Brooks stepped in, no longer bearing the arrogant demeanor of an invincible man, but instead a man whose eyes were darkened, burdened by defeat. He stood there stiffly in his wrinkled suit from the long day, his eyes briefly meeting hers before quickly darting away, as though he lacked the courage to face her directly. "I was wrong," he said, his voice hoarse, trembling as if grappling with his own dignity. A late confession, empty, meaningless. Lena observed him, her face unflinching, betraying no emotion. The silence between them stretched, but it was not the silence of mutual understanding. It was the oppressive void between them, a space that no words could fill. The audience could feel disgust at his belated apology because it couldn't undo what he had done, couldn't erase his cowardice, couldn't restore his lost honor. She leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped on the desk, her voice cold and sharp like a blade. Do you think a simple apology can erase the contempt you've shown? Her words fell without mercy, a direct blow to the last shred of Ethan's pride. He flinched, his lips parting as though to protest, but then quickly sealed them, knowing she was right. Lena didn't stop. You didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected justice. You disrespected those who work to build a better society. To you, the truth was just something to twist for your own gain. And now, with nowhere left to run, you come here hoping for my forgiveness. Her voice was laced with disgust, a tone that the audience could feel with every syllable. She didn't need his pity. She didn't need his remorse. Because this apology wasn't for the people he had harmed. It was only for himself. Ethan clenched his fists as though trying to hold on to the last remnants of the pride that had already shattered. He lowered his head even further, his shoulders slumping, no longer the man who had entered the courtroom with the air of a conqueror. I'll prove I can change. His voice was faint, but there was an unmistakable desperation in it. Not the desperation of someone genuinely seeking redemption, but of someone terrified of the abyss he had dug for himself. Lena looked at him, her gaze unwavering. She had once believed that men like Ethan would never break, that his pride was too vast to be shattered. But now, in front of her, he was nothing but an empty shell, a man clinging to something from his past, even though he knew it no longer belonged to him. Prove it, she smirked, but it wasn't a smile. You can try for the rest of your life, but that doesn't change the fact that you made the wrong choice. And not everyone gets the chance to start over. Ethan said nothing, standing there overwhelmed by the weight of his own mistakes. And the audience felt a mix of disgust and doubt. Could a man like him truly change? Or was this simply another attempt to salvage what was left of his image? San Francisco remained as lively as ever, but for Ethan Brooks, his world had completely shifted. No more expensive suits, no more prestigious offices, no more courtrooms where he once manipulated justice to win. Now he stood in the modest office of a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the rights of the vulnerable, people he had never once given a second thought to. He read the file of a woman who had lost her home due to a financial scam, listened to the story of an immigrant worker who had been treated unjustly. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget that he had once been part of that very unjust system. The people in the organization looked at him with wary eyes, not fully trusting him, and he understood why. His past could not be erased. A lawyer who once defended greedy corporations, a man who sold his morals to win, now standing on the opposite side, trying to help those he had once ignored. The audience still felt disgusted by the man he had been, but for the first time, a faint glimmer of hope flickered. Perhaps he was truly changing. But would that change ever be enough to atone for the mistakes he had made? At a small cafe near downtown, Lena Carter flipped through the morning newspaper, her eyes stopping at a familiar name, Ethan Brooks. An article about his new job, how he had left the world of law to pursue a different path. She skimmed through it, not feeling much emotion, but a part of her understood that he was trying, albeit belatedly. She didn't feel satisfaction, nor did she feel relief. The disgust she had for him hadn't disappeared. She still remembered the hollow look in his eyes during the final trial, still recalled his cowardice when he tried to hide the truth. What he had done couldn't be forgiven with a few good deeds. But she didn't stop him. If he truly wanted to change, then let him find his own path, a path with no acceptance or forgiveness from her. She folded the newspaper and left, leaving the past behind. But deep down, she knew that this story wasn't truly over. Late at night, Ethan stood in front of the mirror in the small apartment he had rented temporarily. He looked at himself, but no longer recognized the person reflected back. No longer the image of a powerful lawyer, no longer the confident arrogance he once wore as armor. Instead, all that remained was a man filled with mistakes, with stains that could never be erased. He took a deep breath, but the guilt still clung to him like a shadow. He could help hundreds of people, could spend the rest of his life doing the right thing, but he could never change the fact that he had once sold his morals to defend the wicked. No one could forgive him, not even himself. He closed his eyes, allowing the disgust to wash over him. Justice had won, but the cost of change was a stain that could never be erased. Thank you for joining us on this intense and thought-provoking journey. This story wasn't just about a courtroom battle. It was about justice, redemption, and the heavy cost of past mistakes. Ethan Brooks may have taken a step toward change, but some stains can never be erased. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Emotional Journey for more gripping narratives that challenge perspectives and stir deep emotions. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next powerful story. See you in the next one.